In 1929, just months after Poland regained independence after over a century of partition, the country's flag carrier took to the skies under a name that would outlast empires, wars, and political revolutions. It was called LOT, the Polish word for flight. The airline was tasked with something almost impossible: connect a country that had only just reappeared on the map of Europe to the rest of the continent. The aircraft was small, the routes were short, and the margins for survival were brutal. Poland sat at a geographic crossroads, surrounded by powers far larger and far better resourced. For nearly a century since, European aviation has accepted a painful truth about Poland. The country sits in a powerful position, but its national carrier has always been too small to matter at the continental level. Lufthansa controls Frankfurt and Munich. Air France KLM controls Paris and Amsterdam. Turkish Airlines controls Istanbul. Geography assigned Poland the middle seat. In June 2025, at the Paris Air Show, LOT Polish Airlines placed its first ever order with Airbus. 40 firm A220 aircraft, split evenly between the smaller A220-100 and the larger A220-300, with options that could expand the deal to 84 airframes in total. Deliveries began in 2027 and run through 2031. But 40 regional jets won't threaten Lufthansa's grip on Frankfurt. They won't dent Turkish Airlines' dominance through Istanbul. They won't displace Ryanair from its iron control over Polish short-haul traffic. And LOT's long-haul fleet expansion? Just 2 additional Boeing 787-8 Dreamliners, both leased, both 12 years old, both formerly flown by Thai Airways, scheduled to arrive in October and December 2026. Yet, Poland is simultaneously building one of the most ambitious airport projects Europe has seen in decades. A €30 billion mega hub designed to handle 34 to 44 million passengers in its first phase, expandable to 100 million in the long term. So, how can 2 leased Dreamliners and 40 regional jets justify an airport 3 times the size of Warsaw Chopin? To understand why Poland is betting tens of billions of euros on this strategy, we need to understand why LOT has spent decades trapped in a structural prison. LOT's geography should have made it powerful. Poland sits between Western Europe, the Baltics, Ukraine, the Balkans, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and East Asia. That positioning is theoretically as valuable as Istanbul's or Vienna's. But Warsaw Chopin Airport has always undercut that potential. It sits inside the urban footprint of Warsaw, with night flight restrictions, limited slot availability, and effectively no room to expand. The runway configuration cannot scale. The terminal cannot grow. LOT adapted by building a network that fits the airport rather than the airline's ambitions. It operated profitable but constrained routes, flew a respected long-haul network, focused on diaspora cities like Chicago and New York, and avoided direct confrontation with the European megacarriers. The trade-off seemed permanent. Airlines that wanted to build megahubs needed mega airports. Carriers with constrained airports stayed regional. Lufthansa, KLM, and Air France built empires on airports that Poland could not match. Meanwhile, low-cost carriers built a different empire on Polish soil. Ryanair and Wizz Air recognized that Polish travelers were among the most price-sensitive in Europe. They flooded secondary airports with point-to-point routes. By May 2026, low-cost carriers controlled 64% of all departing weekly slots from Poland. Ryanair alone holds approximately 35% of the market. Wizz Air holds another 25.5%. LOT, the national flag carrier, had around 23%. The flag carrier was being squeezed from both directions. Too small to compete with the legacy giants, too premium to win the price war below. Then, in 2012, LOT became the first European airline to operate the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. This was a partial answer to the geographic problem. The Dreamliner allowed LOT to fly profitable long-haul routes that larger widebodies could not justify. Passengers demonstrated something the European aviation industry had questioned for years. Travelers from Central and Eastern Europe would pay to fly from Warsaw to Tokyo, Seoul, or Chicago, rather than connecting through Frankfurt or Vienna. But the thing is, the Dreamliner fleet remains small, 15 aircraft total, 8 7878s and 7 7879s. That's not enough to anchor a hub-and-spoke empire, and the airport itself remained the binding constraint. You cannot build a mega-hub at a facility that cannot grow. Chopin's slot ceiling meant that even if LOT ordered 50 widebodies tomorrow, the runway could not handle the connecting waves required to feed them. LOT and Poland needed something purpose-built, a new airport, a new hub, something that didn't exist yet. The Centralny Port Komunikacyjny, now increasingly branded as Port Polska, represents one of the most extensively planned greenfield aviation projects in modern European history. The hub will sit roughly 40 kilometers west of Warsaw, positioned between the capital and Lodz. The internal terminal alone will span 450,000 square meters. That's nearly 3 times the size of all of Warsaw Chopin combined. The facility will open with 2 parallel runways, expandable to 4. Internal passenger capacity is targeted at 34 million annually, scaling to 44 million depending on demand, and eventually to 60 million and beyond, possibly 100 million. Total investment is estimated at around 30 billion euros. Designed by Foster and Partners, with engineering by Bureau Happold, the terminal will process up to 11,000 passengers per hour. But here's what makes Port Polska genuinely different from a normal airport project. It isn't simply a bigger Warsaw airport, it's a multimodal spine for the entire country. The hub integrates directly with a new high-speed rail Y line connecting Warsaw, Lodz, and eventually all of the major Polish cities. Travel time from CPK to Warsaw Central will be approximately 15 minutes, to Lodz around 25 minutes, to other major Polish cities roughly 2 hours. A future high-speed train connection to Berlin could be completed within 3.5 hours. Why does this matter? Because rail integration solves LOT's most fundamental constraint, the airline's catchment problem. You see, hub-and-spoke airlines need feed. Frankfurt works because Lufthansa pulls passengers from across Germany into one airport. Istanbul works because Turkish Airlines pull passengers from across Turkey into one airport. By contrast, Port Polska aims to integrate high-speed rail as a feeder system, dragging passengers from across Poland directly into the hub. That will come in addition to LOT's feeder flights with its regional aircraft. The first phase is targeted to open in 2032. Construction begins in 2026. But before committing to a hub, you need the aircraft to feed it. This is where the A220 order becomes strategically critical. The A220 family occupies a specific segment that LOT has historically lacked. The A220-100 seats between 100 and 135 passengers. The A220-300 seats between 120 and 160. Both offer a range of more than 6,000 kilometers, roughly 3,200 nautical miles. These specifications matter enormously. The aircraft can fly from Warsaw to virtually anywhere in Europe, the Baltics, Scandinavia, the Balkans, North Africa, and deep into Central Asia. It has more capacity and range than typical regional jets, lower trip costs than larger narrowbodies on thin routes, and fuel consumption reduced by 25% per passenger compared to legacy aircraft. LOT's previous regional backbone relied on Embraer E-jets, including leased E195-E2s. The airline had served as the European launch customer for the original E-jet program. The Brazilian manufacturer had built deep industrial ties with Poland, including maintenance facilities and discussions about a potential KC-390 military assembly line. Switching to the Airbus A220 fractured a 2-decade industrial relationship. The A220 fills a gap between regional jets and Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, allowing LOT to economically operate routes that would otherwise be too thin for narrowbodies and too long for smaller regional aircraft. In other words, the A220 is the feeder machine for Port Polska. It can profitably connect secondary European cities, Baltic capitals, Caucasus markets, and Central Asian destinations into the new hub. Without it, the airport has nothing to feed it. But scaling an airline of this size requires financial stability. Here's where LOT's recent performance becomes critical. In 2024, LOT generated revenues of 9.93 billion Polish zloty, approximately $2.5 billion. The carrier achieved a net profit of 688.5 million Polish zloty, alongside an operating profit of 805.7 million Polish zloty. Operating margins reached 8.1%, a strong result in a price-sensitive market. The airline carried 10.7 million passengers in 2024, surpassing its pre-pandemic baseline by nearly 700,000 passengers. In 2025, passenger numbers climbed to 11.7 million. This financial foundation gave LOT the credibility to commit to the A220 deal and to launch its 2024 to 2028 corporate strategy, targeting 110 aircraft and 16.9 million annual passengers. The significance of LOT's expansion isn't really about the A220 order, and it isn't really about Port Polska as a building. It's about whether a mid-sized flag carrier can transform an entire region's aviation map by betting that geography, finally, is no longer a limitation. LOT currently operates 15 Boeing 787s. The 2 additional leased 787-8s arriving in late 2026 bring that to 17. Even with the most aggressive utilization, that fleet supports perhaps 25 to 30 daily long-haul departures. That's not Frankfurt. That's not even close to Frankfurt. By contrast, Turkish Airlines operates over 140 wide-bodies. Lufthansa operates over 100. To genuinely fill a 34 million passenger hub designed for global connectivity, LOT would need more wide-body aircraft. This seems irrational. Airlines typically don't build airports first and aircraft second. They scale capacity to match demand. But Port Polska logic is strategic rather than operational. You see, the project isn't really about replicating Frankfurt overnight. It's about creating the infrastructure that makes future scaling possible. The Polish state is betting that Central and Eastern Europe will generate massive aviation growth over the next 2 decades. The region's middle class is expanding rapidly. Trade flows are shifting eastward. Geopolitical realignment after Russia's invasion of Ukraine has positioned Poland as the logistics anchor of NATO's eastern flank. What LOT and Port Polska do together is create a new connector layer for traffic that currently transits through Frankfurt, Vienna, Munich, or Istanbul. For passengers currently flying from Tashkent to Chicago, from Tbilisi to New York, from Vilnius to Tokyo, Poland is positioning itself as the neutral transit point. The A220 brings them in, the 787 takes them out. But here's the deliberate part. The scarcity of wide-bodies is currently a feature, not a bug. By keeping the long-haul fleet small and focused, LOT can establish premium positioning before scaling. New 787 cabin refurbishments featuring Recaro seats and 4K entertainment systems, scheduled to begin in 2026, signal a quality-first approach. The airline isn't trying to win the cheapest passenger from Warsaw to London. That battle is already lost to Ryanair. It's trying to win the premium connecting passenger from Vilnius to Chicago, a market the low-cost carriers cannot serve. Most competitors cannot replicate Port Polska immediately. The barriers are substantial. Greenfield airport construction in Europe has become nearly impossible. Environmental regulations, local resilience, and political volatility have killed countless similar projects. The fact that Poland is actually building Port Polska, with construction starting in 2026, makes it almost unique in modern European infrastructure projects. Geography presents another barrier. Lufthansa cannot move Frankfurt eastward. KLM cannot relocate Amsterdam. Turkish Airlines cannot replicate its Istanbul hub in another country. The geometry of Poland's position simply cannot be replicated by existing competitors. Then there's the low-cost carrier problem. Ryanair's CEO, Michael O'Leary, has publicly attacked the project, calling Port Polska a sandcastle in the middle of nowhere and dismissing it as the work of very stupid politicians. In July 2025, Ryanair signed a multi-year agreement to triple its annual passenger traffic at Warsaw Modlin Airport to 5 million by 2030. This creates a fascinating dynamic. If Ryanair and Wizz Air entrench themselves at secondary Polish airports, rather than relocating to Port Polska, LOT may get a cleaner hub environment unpolluted by low-cost price wars on feeder routes. But Port Polska could become a mixed-model battlefield, where LOT's premium ambitions clash with ultra-low-cost economics. That tension remains unsolved. Yet, every European flag carrier must now account for what Poland is demonstrating. The assumption that the hub-and-spoke map of Europe was permanent is suddenly vulnerable. Lufthansa, KLM, and Air France built empires on geographic positions that seemed unassailable. Those positions become less unassailable when a new hub emerges with modern infrastructure, multimodal rail integration, and state backing. Turkish Airlines, in particular, should be watching closely. Istanbul currently captures enormous volumes of traffic between Europe and Central Asia, the Caucasus, and parts of East Asia. Port Polska is positioned to compete directly for that connecting flow. The race to control the next generation of European hub competition is accelerating precisely because legacy carriers recognize the implications. 40 A220s and 2 leased Dreamliners don't scale volume, they scale strategic positioning. Strategic positioning can be disproportionate to current scale if the infrastructure foundation is large enough, but the strategy contains a glaring vulnerability: the wide-body deficit. Port Polska is designed for 34 to 44 million passengers. Initially, LOT's current and committed long-haul fleet of 17 787s cannot fill that scale. Global aerospace supply chain delays at both Boeing and Airbus mean LOT has been forced to lease 12-year-old Dreamliners from the secondary market, just to add 2 aircraft. If Poland is genuinely serious about Port Polska as a global hub, LOT needs a substantial wide-body order well before 2032. That likely means a contest between additional Boeing 787-9s and 787-10s, or potentially an Airbus A350 entry that builds on the new A220 relationship. Port Polska will not replace Frankfurt or Istanbul overnight. Lufthansa will definitely not disappear. Turkish Airlines isn't going to collapse. The great connecting hubs will continue serving the majority of European travelers. But LOT and Port Polska together create something new, a demonstration that for certain passenger flows between Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltics, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and global destinations, a new hub layer is genuinely possible. When the first passengers board flights through Port Polska in 2032, they'll complete a journey that took almost a century to make possible. 40 regional jets, a handful of leased Dreamliners, a single greenfield airport, and proof that sometimes the most significant changes in European aviation don't require hundreds of aircraft. Sometimes they require conviction, infrastructure, and the willingness to bet that geography finally can be redrawn. The question isn't whether LOT can fill Port Polska on opening day, it's whether the rest of European aviation is really paying attention to what Poland is building.